We are going to just continue our detour into how how we just started a principle of movement in the structure of Islam. So before we are going to delve into the legality of issues, how we can have inferences or judgments which are relevant to the legal or the sociological aspects of Muslim societies in general, or the way we can construct a jurisprudence from it. So the main source of the Islamic law or jurisprudence is Quran and the Sunnah in that sense, and the documentation of Sunnah in what we call Hadith literature in that sense. So before we can appreciate the gravity or appreciate the how can have the applicability of the Islamic law, how can have induce or how can deduce judgments to the different applicabilities which can be far and wide and across traditions and cultures from history from those last 1400 half years. So it is a very rich history as well as legacy in that sense. And in the Iqbalian, the way he has tried to articulate it is that in the last 14 centuries, the Muslim jurists, they, on the one hand, they have tremendously just fought on very trivial issues through thick and thin, but they have also developed the broad contours to agree on certain minimal principles in that sense, or certain minimality is there where we can get agreed upon things, and from which we can deduce things in that sense. So the impending need in the Iqbalian sense is to reconstruct the legal aspects of legality of issues, which is very historically rich in tradition, and in the spirit of Quran, to have a legal reconstruction of the Quran and Sunnah to the pressing issues which are there. The pressing issues being the on one side, on the epistemic side, the barrage of Western criticisms or commentaries or understanding of how human mind or human societies work or should work in that sense. So the notions of secular humanism, the notion of utilitarian mode of ethics, or agnostic humanism, which are later things which can be. So these under this background, Iqbal is trying to rescue an interpretation of an Islamic law or jurisprudence which in its pristine form is faithful to the way to the Quranic precepts in that sense, and how different legalists, primarily in the which is normally called as madhabs, the four madhabs, how they have tried to reconstruct or formulate Islamic law according to their times in that sense. So before we are going to see this thing, so because we are going to also conflate this Iqbalian understanding or general understanding of Islamic law, we have to understand it since we are also taking side by side the how Orientalists or Western barrage of understanding of Islam or understanding of Quran in that sense, which is a particular interpretation of law which is after Renaissance, an understanding of enlightenment, or the enlightenment, post enlightenment era, that mind, that that sort of understanding of law has to be conflated with how they fundamentally try to understand Quran, not as something divine, as sort of human agency, or as which is not the way Muslims in general see it in that sense. Their understanding of Quran is very pristine, and it's untinctured in that sense. It is a human understanding of which is always less than perfect, towards a perfect something which is non-human or non-perfect, non-human, but uh, an unfolding of something divine in that sense, which our finite minds are trying to capture in that sense. So in that sense, you have to see that the Western, the way on one side, maybe Iqbal is also trying to see how we can have a legal reconstruction, but also trying to appreciate having a strong grounding in the Quranic way of understanding things, and conflating it that it is relevant, and how the different jurists, how they were trying to make sense of things in that sense. So before we are going to see it, the first thing is that I want to make a couple of points, because the legal understanding of things, as is being inferred from Quran and Sunnah, or from Hadith literature, it can not be understood. You have to see the two streams, or two currents, which are simultaneously going on. So one side, it's that the source of law, or Islamic law, which is divine in that sense, it has a supra-rational element in that instance. So one is something called in Urdu, what we call akli and nakli, what's transmitted, and what is rational in that sense. So what is rational has a human agency in that sense. It's our so man becomes important in that sense. In that sense, you have a rational understanding is also the mix of how rational things, how we construct rationality under the how medieval, how post-Renaissance thinkers constructed rationality, whether it's Kant, whether it's Robespierre, or social thinkers constructed rationality, or how Greeks understood rationality in that sense, or rationality and logic. And we talk of extra rational element, which is in some sense a priori understanding of a truth, a divine truth, which we are only trying to fathom, which we cannot really. So it's also a sort of thing that that at a fundamental level, how we can fundamentally see human beings in that fundamental sense of the word. So if we, as if God communicates to us through extra mental or something which is revolutionary, and we are coming, our understanding of it is the source of it is that thing. So it leads to a different sort of appreciation of law in that sense. The sovereignty of doesn't lie with man. The sovereignty lies with something divine in that sense. And prophet, as an agency, he is it is being transmitted or transformed or understood through that agency, the institution of prophethood in that sense. So here you can say the way one is the law, the other is the law which is informed from the Roman law or the Christian or a Judaic understanding of things. How maybe Islam took some aspects of it, or Islam, how we can see Islamic thing. One is the, so before we are going to see it, so we have to see fundamentally how we can see the Quran, the coming of Quran, how we can reconstruct the Quranic history, and then we can also how we can see Sunnah in that context, and also how we can reconstruct the Hadith literature, because these are the three primary sources of Islamic law. And in that context also we can also see how maybe ijma and qiyas and ijtihad they come, I will not say they come later, but they can be seen as a sequence to these three fundamental sources in that sense. So here I'm going to just conflict two understandings of how we can see Quran, or how we can see Hadith, or how we can see Sunnah, and how we can see it in the history in that sense. So if we want to give it a non-human agency, if we take Quran as something divine, as Muslims take it that way, uh, and part of divine is not necessarily to be seen in exclusion to how a rational mode of it is to be constructed. But if it is not to be seen as divine, the Western understanding of Quran, or the Western understanding of Hadith, or Orientalistic understanding of Hadith literature, which may not be sometimes favorable in that sense, or it may see it in a larger Judeo Christian, if I use the words of Patricia Kroon, in a Hagaric background in that sense. And maybe the lot of biblical and other stories which are there in the Quran, whether they have, according to them, the altered conditions, they have been taken in toto, or they have been taken as minor variations from those very sources. So if we can call in the Islamic ulama, they will talk of the tradition Israeliyat, the Israeliyati tradition, the Judo-Christian elements in Islam. So where our maybe more focus would rather be trying to say the elements of law in the Judeo-Christian law, how it got transformed, how we can perceive Islamic law in that sense. So this is one aspect of it. So before, so we cannot really appreciate it in that sense. So we have to first see how we can see Quran in that fundamental sense. So I'm going to side by side try to conflate the Quranic understanding of Islamic discourse, as well as how the you can see it's the other counterpart. Trying to see it as a part of human agency in that sense, which is humane outly. It's a historical, a Western, I would rather say Western critical historical tradition in that sense, whose tools are not necessarily how Muslims see things in that sense. So what I'm saying is, for example, so for example, if in the scholars of science of rhetoric, means which have talked of categories of style, there may be orality, there may be literary tradition, or there may be scientific things. So we can say the what we call miracle of Quran. It combines all of these styles together in that sense. So if I'll quote prophetic tradition, so she says the door to ponder over and deliberate in its inner meanings shall remain open till the last day. So this is what Prophet meant when he prayed for Sayyidina Abdullah bin Abbas in his words, Allahumma alamal ilm tawil wal fiqh fid din. O Allah, bestow on him the sciences of exegesis and comprehensions of religion. So based on there are five principles, which is Quran, prophetic traditions, sayings of companions, sayings of followers of companions, the Arabic lexicon, and common sense. So here I want to say Quran is not a common book in that sense, because it's for 23 years uh, uh, it was communicated. It came as a sort of revolutionary thing in bits and pieces, and each revelation was according to the how in particular cultural or social problem Prophet of Islam was engaged, or in some sense, and a response to that sense in the divine sense. So familiarity with Arabic to explain the Quran is not enough. One must have principles of tafsir, science of hadith, principles of giving hadith, jurisprudence, knowledge of syntax, hadith, grammar, etymology, literature, and rhetoric. And to that, you have to have a purity of heart, as well as deep devotion to Allah, which we normally call, in that sense, taqwa. So if we attempt to secularize jurisprudence, so we can find agreed based upon values. So for example, in Arabic there is a quote: "Al-ahkamu tatagayru tatagayrul zaman," means injunctions keep changing with the change of time. So the legal edicts, which I was trying to say, the changing needs for changing times, and unchanging needs for the changing times also. So how we can see it that way? So we cannot see it unless until we have to see how we can fundamentally appreciate Quran in that sense. So here we want to see that the whole process of religion is to in the Western Enlightenment project, religion is to be seen in that sense. Either, for example, if I'll quote Sigmund Freud, who says religious is obsessive, compulsive neurosis of mankind. So it's a very negative way of looking at religion. But and if at all religious, so it's not something, it's against something, it's rational in that sense, or it caters to your those insecure needs which are there. But if we want to see it in the sense that we have to rescue religion from the critiques of modern science and historical criticisms by locating its true reality in private experiences of intuition and feeling in that sense. So if the Quran, if you can say the Quranic text, whether it was in Kufa, Basra, Makkah, or Damascus, how it was uh, how so the whole question about Western historiography is they not only question the way in order to prove things in a non-divine sense, in order to have a human understanding, rational understanding of the way Quran was constructed, not as a divine agency, uh, but as it was historically constructed, or the way Hadith literature has been constructed in that sense. So you have to see they the miracle of Quran in that sense, how from 1400 years it's being it's preserved in that text. How can you explain in that sense? So there have been explanations to the other way around, to show in some sense that the explanations, for example, there's a famous hypothesis of Nordican Schwarzen paradigm. So if large parts of the Quran had already been gathered, there would be no need to take such a great effort to bring it all together later under Abu Bakr and Usman. So this is a famous thing, how Quran, the in the Usmanic era, how it was, all the copies were taken, and how it was somehow the Quran was standardized in that sense. So, various imperial centers like Caliphate, Egypt, Damascus, Makkah, Medina, Kufa, and Basra. So the lot of question which, for example, there is this book by Stephen Schumacher. The title of the book is Creating the Quran. So even the title suggests that there is some non-divine origin of Quran. So what are the theories they give it? So they say the Quran, when the Quranic text got when the spread of Islam got from Medina to other places after the death of Prophet of Islam, so the local lexical literature, the local lexical or the local linguistic variations were absorbed in the text of the Quran in that sense. And it was under Imperial Abdul Malik or Marwan. It was the standardized Quran was taken, and it was not the original Quran in that sense. But Muslims or the general Islamic literature, the literature is counter to it. So how it's relevant to it is because what I want to emphasize is that the very divine nature of Quran is being conflicted against a rational understanding, an understanding of Quran or understanding of Hadith or understanding of Sunnah in a certain background in that sense. Yes, yes. So we have to see it though. So unless and until we can appreciate belief in Quran as if it's a divine, then we can also appreciate its the law of the whatever springs from Quran in that sense. So it has been the way it has been historically that way. So so what we have to do is that so against this the imperial Quran, which these Western Orientalists talk of, which is produced under Abdul Malik and Al-Hajjaj. So in order to understand the circumstances of Quranic origin, we must fully engage the findings of modern memory science and science of oral letters, which sought to rescue religion from the critiques of modern science and historical criticism, and by locating its true reality in private expressions of intuition and feeling in that sense. So we must approach Quran as a text that was we must approach Quran as a text that was composed and recomposed in the process of recollection and oral transmissions, and various other religious cultures of Western Asia during 7th century. So this is the Western interpretation. The previous paraphrasing was more how it should be seen in a non-Western way in that sense. So other thing is the criticism is the oral and the written cultures have radically different ideas of what it means to be iteration of a text or tradition, to be same or accurate in relation to the previous versions of the same cultural material. Maybe I'm a bit digressing from the main topic, but the thing is that the way we because Quran is primarily it was an oral tradition in that sense. So the paleography, the science of paleography was not in that sense. So how people wrote, so it was very tedious. They wrote on parchments, they wrote on bones. They had a certain sort of paper at that time available. So it was fundamentally an oral tradition. So in that oral tradition, how we can remember things, and how Quran was remembered, and how the ordering of the surahs was they were done in that certain way. So the main criticism of Western Orientalists or these people is that in the oral tradition, if you go from one stage to another, there will always be some iteration in the process of memory, and whatever is being later recorded, it will not it will have some, it will be altered in some sense. So the oral text might have intermingled with the local dialects and languages, and the text would not have remained the same, which is not the way Muslims fundamentally see it. So neither oral composition nor oral tradition can ever escape the influence of audience and social circumstances. So if the meaning can only be interpreted by way a three-way relationship of text, interpreter, and listener. So it means the move from orality to writing almost certainly was neither sudden nor singular, which can be understood more from Hadith literature, the way Hadith literature addresses these issues. But while in case of Quran, the Muslim understanding is that it is divine, and it is preserved by divine invocation or injections in that sense. So the way Crook and Kroon say, there is some reason to support Quran was put together out of plurality of early Hungarian religions, which I said previously also in that sense, and the canonical text of Quran under the supervision and coordination of Abdul Malik in that sense. And the complex of Quran prayer history is shrouded in mystery, requires us to peruse cautiously and skeptically guided ways, always by the hermeneutics of suspicion, historical criticism, and historical study of religions in that sense. So this is the way. First, I'm trying to see how the barrage of criticisms on the bit, how Quran sees it. Now, if I take Fazlur Rahman, one of the, you can say he's a middle of East and West, then we can go to traditional scholars, how they see it in that sense. For example, Fazlur Rahman, major themes of Quran says in that sense, modern Western literature in Quran falls on works that attempt to reconstruct the chronological order of the Quran in that sense. So they question it, the order of the Quran, why it's not same. So they have different explanations for that. Works that seek to influence the Jewish and Christian ideas from the Quran, which I was saying, the Judeo-Christian influence. Works that are describing the center of Quran, either whole or in certain aspects. So the question of questions for Fazl Rahman is, for man is whether he can control history towards good ends or whether he will succumb to its vagaries. So he says, some Muslims in the current day, they have fallen to whether they will explain Keynesian model or the Marxism model, taking those models, trying to explain the economic, how we can mitigate economic redistribution of wealth, which Quran also has its own way of trying to say that wealth should not circulate only among the rich. So in absence of profits, the Quran seems to require some amount of collective leadership and responsibility in that sense. So for example, here also, so in that sense, which Iqbal also sees, for example, modern mind, it's a bit, so modern mind cannot understand that modern Muslim opinion is divided under changed conditions of today. The daughter should get an equal share with her brother. So the opponents of that view, you can read in a paragraph of Iqbal also, he also tries to get that a wife gets also divorce, she also gets the dowry, she also gets that mahar, or when she also gets the property from the husband's place. You can explain it that way. Or the way Fazlur Rahman gives explanation is in those times, women, the witness, one witness of man is equal to two witnesses. In those times, women were not that much involved in the trade. So you have not to interpret that ayat of Quran in a particular sense. You can modify it. It was not met accordingly in that sense. So you can see it, the variation of opinions in that sense. So for Judeo-Christian scholars, for example, Richard Bell, the historical source of Quran, the main historical source of Quranic teachings is Christianity. But here we can say there can be the way the Islamic law is not law like Judaic law, which is very strict in that sense, or it's not the watering down of Judaic law in that sense. It has some balance in it which we'll try to see. So the text discussing the Quran has been produced as it has profound impact on. So apart from the law, the aspects of law, but the way Quran has fundamentally impacted Arabic language and literature. So it also implores us to ask what sort of message does it contain. So one is maybe faced with several linguistic, historical, and hermeneutical barriers that need to be overcome to appreciate this literary work. So maybe, for example, for that one has to go to reports of Arab sources, non-Arab sources, and also dating. How can date that textual analysis if you want to have authenticated the way Hadith literature is full with the fact that how can authenticate a Sahih Hadith from a non-Sahih Hadith from an how that reportage is there in that sense. How can authenticate or verify a given document whether it's Hadith, Sahih Hadith or not. So in that context, you can say uh, paleography, which is the study of scripts, alphabets, styles, which may evoke a particular, maybe in that sense, a geography and the time present. So if we have, there are two datings. One is the Durham dating and one is the Birmingham dating. So in the radiocarbon dating, the error of plus minus 30 years, you can take it that way. So it has been, so some manuscripts much older, which put to rest that it was formulated during in the reign of Abdul al-Malik al-Mamun, or it was post 7th century formation. In all likelihood, it was from the first half of the 7th century. So from the recent or this radiocarbon dating, what I should say, radiocarbon dating analysis, maybe it has clinched the origin of Quran in the 7th century. So maybe a lot of work which has been done by Western Orientalists or people who work on the how the formation of Quran has been there in that sense. So they might have come closer to the how Muslims Muslims, the way the literature of Muslims, how the Quran has been preserved as a sacred text, even as an oral tradition. In the so for example, so in the Western Orientalist, so basically, if I'll quote Jonathan Brown, who says that Western method of trying to see Quran or trying to see this religious literature is basically a Western critical method. So they want to apply the same method to Quran also. So the attempts of Goldziher, Shaft, Join Ball, and many. So which Iqbal also in the later when he talks of Hadith, so he is critiquing. For example, he talks of Professor Goldziher has subjected to a searching exercise in the light of modern canons of historical criticism, and arrives at conclusions they are on the whole untrustworthy. So Iqbal is not trusting Goldzier's methodology in that fundamental. So it's flawed in that sense. So we'll talk of Goldzier's strategy later. Before we are coming to that. So for example, so in the eyes of Muslims, Islam is the God's true religion, and Muslims God's chosen community. Why are those? So the question is why? Because in the process of trying to understand this question, so it's also why then Muslims are not coming up to the mark in that sense in the community of nations. So these questions are the questions of Oriental interpretation of Quran or Hadith literature. They also have a certain colonial hangover or the response of the Muslims scholars. They are in the process of trying to engage with this question, they are also looking inward, looking in that sense. So maybe I'll just use words, some Urdu sentences, what Quran is. So this was the Orientalist and Western way of looking at Quran. Now I am trying to see how Muslims, in their own eyes, Muslim scholars, how they try to see Quran. Because later I have to come to the important point. The point is that Quran is revealed from God, and as a part of revelation, the source of law, Islamic law, is that appreciation of understanding of that law in that sense. So that understanding, if we want to reconstruct that understanding, so we have to also see. So I'll just use Urdu words. So I've taken it from different books, Muhajirat, Quran, and many books, these sentences. So in order to come to the proof what Quran is, or the nature of revelation of Quran, how it was seen over many years. So I'll just say in Urdu, and where I'll feel translated. For example, कुरान मजीद की तरतीब इत्तिफाकी नहीं बल्कि तरतीबी है. इन्ना अलैना जमीन व कुरानन फैज़ा कुरानन फत्तबिउ कुरानन सुम्मा इन्ना अलैना बनानहु. हमारे जिम्मा इसको जमा करवाना, इसको सुनाना. तो जब हम इसको सुना चुके हैं तो इस सुनाए की पैरवी करो, फिर हमारे जिम्मा है इसकी वजाहत करना. So it's not up to we human mortals to see whether how the Quran has been revealed or how it is going to be preserved. It's something divine. It's yes. So कुरान अरबी अदब का मुस्तनद माखज़ है. चूँकि कुरान मजीद का मकसद तालीम और तज़किया है, इसलिए इसका तर्ज बयान मुसन्निफाना नहीं बल्कि खतीबाना, वाइज़ाना और मुअल्लिमाना है. So it means the way Quranic approach of things is not as if somebody is writing some text in sitting. It's more or less, it's didactic, it's pedantic. It's like you are asking somebody to do and do. You should do this thing, you should not do this thing, you should do this thing. And in that things, it's also sort of semi-poetic in the sense. And the other is Sunnat ki lagwi mani hai wazih rasta. So the way I was trying to say, Quran and Sunnah. Sunnah means there should be a clear path on which you have to move. If you want to trace the Islamic law to these things. Quran ko Quraysh. So if I just use, as an SLI, he has used the words Quran Majid ko Quraysh ki taksali zaban mein राइज किया गया है. So if there was various dialects, there is a if I use for Mufti Justice Taqi Usmani, he says that for me it's a mystery why there are these 7 dialects in the Quran. So but Qurayshi dialect, whether there are it's a Qurayshi dialect. Quran has been preserved in that sense. So it's a huge debate that way. And Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri says, before understanding the exegesis of Quran, one must be fully proficient in grammar, language, and literature, meaning and syntax of Arabic language, and adapting the original body of law. So this is the way we have to see. So now I am coming to what I was trying to say. The Judaic law and the Christian law. For example, what Iqbal says. But why are these rules made part of revolution, the ultimate aim of which is man's life? The answer to this question is furnished by the history of Christianity, which appeared as more powerful reaction against the spirit of legality manifested in Judaism. By setting up an ideal of otherworldliness, it no doubt did succeed in spiritualizing life, but its individualism could see no spiritual value in the complexity of human social relations. So this is the way the Quran considers it necessary to unite religion and state, ethics and politics in a single revelation, much in the same way Plato does in Republic. So if this is the way Quran sees it, so I'll just say the same thing in Urdu. तौरात के अहकाम बहुत सख्त हैं, लेकिन इंजील के अहकामात निहायत नरम हैं। तौरात में मखसूस अहकाम पर ज़्यादा जोर और इंजील में अमूमी अहकाम पर, ज़बूर में मुनाजातें और दुआएं हैं। कुरान मजीद का अंदाज खतीबाना है. This is what I was trying to say. It's more direct. It's like somebody is on the pulpit just addressing. तालीफाना नहीं है, तकरीरी है, तहरीरी नहीं है. It's not written. It's something oral. Somebody is saying तकरीरी है. Somebody is making a speech. कुरान मजीद का असलूब उर्दू फारसी के गज़ल मुसलसल के करीब है. Also, if you want to have a poetic appreciation of Quran, it's like this. It's closer to Persian Urdu ghazal in that sense. अगरचे फ़लसफ़े और कानून के बुनियादी मसाइल इसमें बयान हुए हैं, वो मुआशियात की इस्लाह में भी हैं. क्या कुरान मजीद को फ़लसफ़े किताब करार दिया जा सकता है, या इसके मजमून की किताब इलाही के दर्जे को कम करने के मुतरादिफ है? So it's like Quran cannot be said about book. It's a book of science or book of law or book of history or book of what I should say knowledge. So it's above it because it's in scattered way. It's addressing in that sense. On the whole, it has something to say to everybody, but you cannot pin down it's only this in that sense. So since we are interested in Islamic law, so Quran Majid, so we can say, for example, Quran Majid, apart from Aqidah, the first thing, the Quran Majid का दूसरा मजमून अहकाम है. So यानी कुरान मजीद के वो हिदायत जो ज़ाहिरी अमाल को मुनज़्ज़म करते हैं, बरह रास्त अहकाम पर मबनी आयत 200 या 200 से और इतनी मजीद जो अहकाम से बिला वास्ता ताल्लुक़ रखती है. So there are more than 250 ayats of Quran or more than 250 which are related to these 250 which are directly related with ahkam or from which legality can be derived. Out of 6,000 ayats of Quran, 2,250 are directly and 250 are indirectly, or maybe 500-600 ayats are from which jurisprudence can be derived. मजीद ये कि जो काम से बिलवास्ता ताल्लुक़ रखते हैं, फ़िक़्ह के मानी है गहरी समझ. फ़िक़्ह means law, फ़िक़्ह in that Islamic jurisprudence means deeper understanding of things. ये चंद सुस आयात लामुतनाही हालात और मसाइल पर मुंतबिक हो रही हैं. इंसानी ज़िंदगी में बेहद हिसाब और बेशुमार कैफियत और लातादाद मामलात हर वक्त हर कहाँ हर शख्स को पेश आ रहे हैं. ये सारे के सारे मामलात इन 250 नुसूस को लामहदूद नुसूस हालात पर करने के लिए गहरे गौर फिक्र की ज़रूरत है. जब तक अमीक फहम से काम न लिया जाए, इस वक्त तक इन 250 नुसूस को ज़िंदगी के लामुतनाही कोशिशों में मुंतबिक करना नामुमकिन है. लिहाजा फ़िक़्ह यानी गहरा फहम और बसीरत इस सारे अमल का लाज़मी हिस्सा है. ये कुरान मजीद का दूसरा बुनियादी मज़मून है. So this is very important. So what these words are saying is that of these 250 or 500 or 600 verses which are directly related with the law, do's and don'ts, how we should, so in which we can come criminal law, in which we can come marriage, divorce, property, issues of property, rights. So they are. So you can see the genius of these early legalists or thousands of legalists or these four main jurisprudences from which we have derived the Maliki, Shafi, the Ham. So how they have just the application of law which can be ultimately traced or axiomatized or formalized from these 250 verses or 500 verses or 600 verses. They can create those infinite rich possibilities where the application of that law can be made possible in different circumstances. And beauty of it is that we can reach to the source of law, which is Quran, or in Islamic understand it's Allah or God directly, which is trying to communicate to you. So it's to be a faqih, it's trying to, or to be a jurist, it's more or less trying to just just trying to understand the will of Allah and communicate it to the rest of mankind. And prophets being the most the clearer or the foremost interpreters of law in that sense. So, in that sense, Quran is not a detailed legal manual only, but about 500 or book verses provide legal injections, which I was saying, and even in major questions such ritual prayer, Quran is often vague in that sense. So it was left to later jurists or faqihs or muhaddis to just elaborate on. So to say that least is that where among the four jurisprudence we have the Maliki, the Shafi, the Hanbali, and the Hanafi jurisprudence. We have, for example, in Hanafi source we have the Quran. The source of law is Quran, the Hadith, sound Hadith, the companion opinions, the method of legal reasoning based on Quran and Sunnah. For a Shafi, it's Quran, Quran and reliable Hadith, consensus of scholars, companion opinions, analytical reasons based on Quran and Sunnah. And for Maliki, it's described by Quran, prophetic Sunnah, which is understood through Hadith, companion rulings, practice of Medina, consensus, the ruling and communal needs. And Hanbali describes Imam Hanbali's source of law as Quran and reliable Hadith, consensus of early community, companion opinions, weak Hadith, analogical reasoning based on Quran. So you can see they more or less agree on Quran and Sunnah, but they may agree where to put where to put consensus of scholars or companion opinions. The order or the succession may be different, one against the other in that sense. Or if I quote Jonathan Brown, he says the crux of difference between Ahl Hadith and Ahl Rai, which is another group, was how one determined if a Hadith was reliable enough to be accepted as law, or each madhab or school, if Jonathan Brown says, represented a tradition of transmitting, explaining, re-examining, readjusting. So here comes a minor point of Ibn Taymiyyah, where he explains that if in the Hadith literature, how it has to be constructed, what is Sahih, what is Mutawat, what is. So it is a whole tradition to it, how we can from wheat and chaff, how we can get the spurious hadith from the original hadith. Also, there's a whole ilm to it, and Muslims have been very much the hadith literature. It's a very sound science in that sense. So, if I quote, for example, how we can categorize weak hadith, Ibn Taymiyyah says, those who do not have Sahih Isnad, but were enough that could use them in law. Hadith. So basically, these hadith, it's sort of how hadith got collected is basically reports are there, and whether those reports were mutawatir, which is massively transmitted, and which you wielded epistemologically certain knowledge, means ilmi yaqini in that sense. So maybe the Sunni tradition has its own, the Quran Sunnah. Maybe in the Shia literature, it's not only Quran and Sunnah, it's the way Ahlul Bayt also, how they have also taken in that sense. And maybe the book after Quran is that of Imam Bukhari in the Sunni canonical tradition. Where, for example, 5,300 ahadith are reported by Abu Huraira, Ibn Umar 2,600, Anas bin Malik 2,300, Hazrat Aisha 2,200, and Abu Bakr 142 only, Hazrat Ali 536, Hazrat Umar 537. So it's a hugely people how this hadith literature has been constructed, this ilm al-hadith. So it's a huge discipline. The point I want to make is that basically the sources of Islamic law, whether it's Quran, whether it's Sunnah, or whether it's hadith literature, and how hadith literature is constructed, it's in itself a big study in that sense. But if we want to, for example, the large portions of Islamic legal, theological, or popular religious traditions come not from the book that Muslims hold to be God's revelation. They not only come from that book, but the legacy of Muhammad, whom they believe that God chose to explain and elucidate. So so the elucidation of Quran comes through Sunnah in that sense. And from that Sunnah, basically how Hadith literature is constructed both by those reports, whose chain of transmitters through which scholar traces a matan or text back to the Prophet of Islam. So the question is, so what I was trying to say, the application of Islam, when Islam got moved from Medina to Syria to Egypt to Basra to Baghdad to Central Asia. So how the local, or even I did not talk previously about how in Malaysia, Indonesia, how those lands apart from Central Asia, how or parts of China or Indian subcontinent, because each fiqh has some, it's uniquely related to some particular land in that sense. Why it got mm, popular, or why in a particular place, for example, why Hanfi jurisprudence. So it may have historical and other many reasons. And apart from those reasons is how, for example, Abdullah bin Masud instructed his newly established community on the tenets and facts of Islam as it is adopted to the surroundings of Christian, Jewish, and Zoroastrian Iraq. Abu Hanifa would become a cornerstone of legal study in Iraq and eponym of Hanafi school of law, while in Medina the Muslim community, yeah, so the Maliki thing is closer to being Madinat, which is known in that sense. So now I'm coming to a very important, since we have talked of Goldizar in that sense. In Iqbal also somehow critiques Goldizar. So Goldizar can be taken as one of the, and there is a concluding paragraph in that towards that effect. How one is the how Quran is constructed in that sense, the early Quran. So it's more or less not that controversial in that sense. Uh, in Muslims, it's not controversial, but in how Western historiography sees it. Uh, but while in case of Hadith literature, these isnads, the massively transmitted reports. So there has been a huge literature, starting with Goldizar, Join Ball, and many people, Joseph Shack, and who have just doubted the veracity of Hadith literature. So why I'm saying this Hadith literature is because the whole legality in the legal schools, they are not only derived from Quranic injections, but also in consonance with Sunnah and in consonance with the how Hadith literature is constructed in that sense. So if you can just question the veracity of Hadith, the massively transmitted Hadith literature, there can be two interpretations. One is that so Hadiths, where Hadith literature was constructed to the socio-political or economic needs, or how rulers, what I should say, administered, uh, or how they allowed a certain part of narrative to get to their own needs or whims, or they suppressed some information, or they allowed some information in that sense. So it doesn't become that divine in that sense. But the other opinion is that that Muslims have been very muhaddis. These people, they have been very careful in trying to preserve this. The sanctity of Hadith literature, and it can be as much rigorous as it can be in that sense. So, for example, one of the main, since we are talking of Goldizar, if you take it as a reference, so I'll just will take some of his points because, and then maybe some his queries have been somehow, I will not say dismissed. They have been there are holes which have been pointed off. I'm not my field is not this. I cannot say. So from going through the literature, I can say what are his concerns or what Goldser's theory is, how Muslims, how they can have responded to his critique. For example, Talab Melush, I have taken him from. So for example, main thesis of Goldser is to support this theory of fabrication of hadith during the Umayyad period. So Goldzer has been a fundamental source of hadith for West, and after a lapse of uh, questions of country, Professor Short tried to investigate the Professor Shaft hadith. So there is an interesting Moldke's letter to Goldzer. So what he says, so he's following Goldzer. After all, I must tell you that you are the terrible man. With all your doubts about the originality of hadith, you have awakened my suspicion too. Eventually, I will be more suspicious than you are. You have completely upset my simple soul in that sense. So this is how its influence has been, which is current, continuing up to this time. Whether you read Patricia Kuhn, whether you read Stephen Shoemaker, or many joining, also many people in that sense. So what is the gold research fabrication, which is uh, talks of Umayyad periods mainly. So what are his points? He says that there was involvement of companion in the fabrication of hadith, disputes of Umayyads and pious scholars, involvement of Umayyads in the falsification of hadith, involvement of Umayyads in the sponsors, sponsoring theologians who have fabricated hadith, or involvement of theologians who were against Umayyads in trying to go to the other way around, praising Prophet of Islam, praising Hazrat Ali, so going to other, stretching things to the other side. For example, example of Goldzer is he's quoting. Even, for example, when he says that, for example, when he talks of Abu Huraira, he talks of Prophet ordered to kill dogs except hunting sheep dogs, not farm dogs. Umar, son Abdullah ibn Umar says Abu Huraira has his own cornfields. So he has vested interest in farm dogs. So he tries to say from this that maybe Abu Huraira had some, but a lot of muhadis they take this thing that it was Abdullah bin Umar. He tried to say it. It was not. He was imputing some things from his from for his personal interests. So lot of concerns or lot of uh, holes which Goldizar talks of. Maybe in Islamic tradition, Muslims, these muhaddises of different caliber, they have also talked of these issues in that sense. For example, one criticism of Goldizar is that Goldizar did not delve into the study of Umayyad rule and biography of these rulers and subordinate and religious personalities who were charged with the fabrication of hadith. So Goldizar neglects Quran's discipline and has no awareness of Quran explaining the Sunnah. So this is another thing in that sense. Or if I take Allama Iqbal also quoting Shah Walillah, Muhaddis Dahlvi, who says, for example, the Prophet who aims at all embracing principles for different peoples, aims at all embracing principles for different people, nor leaves them him out to work out their own leaves of conduct. So his aim is to train one particular people and use them as a nucleus for building of universal Shariat. So maybe Shah Willow talks of something called mutawatiri lafzi and mutawatiri matan. How matan got transmitted or preserved in that sense, whether in words or in terms of meanings also. So whatever I have said in that sense, Hadith criticism or the way Quran has been seen. So the point is the reasons why Orientalists or these interpreters have tried to come to explanation of Quran and Sunnah in that sense, or because whole sort of legal reconstruction which is arrived from Quran or varied understandings of Sunnah or Hadith literature, which is the edifice of legal discipline or discourse. So if you say that the basis of Sunnah or Hadith literature is not sound, or the collection of Quran is not, so what can we say? Does it say? Can we impute some? One is saying they because these scholars they came from a peculiar under post Enlightenment, post Renaissance era. So apart from the Judeo-Christian or those biases which are inter-religious biases, but the more important thing is the post-Renaissance construction of historical method, Western critical historical method. When it is conflated on how Muslims or medieval theologians or these people who had ilm tafsir or these traditional sources of Quran, whether it's which Quran or these Hadith literature, how it has been reconstructed in that sense. So they, apart from trying to say the it's a different the differences maybe because they are different ways of looking from different religions, but more important is that Western critical method which is out and out secular in that sense. So it doesn't it wants to see only things in the scientific way, in the Western critical historical tradition in that sense. So the holes, pointing of holes in the Hadith literature can be appreciated or understood in that context. Now, this is the base part of it. So the next part of it is how we can the way the legal reformulation and lot of questions which the Quran addresses, or a lot of rulings which are there as far as criminal law, the jurisprudence, as far as the different rulings the Quran tries to, in a didactic way, tries to give. So they may not be in, they are maybe at loggerheads, or they may not be in consonance with how Western legal reconstruct, how we have legal discourse is there. So in a lot of ways there can be some understanding, but in a lot of other ways there is not that under that discomfort of not agreeing is there, and it can be traced fundamentally to how Quran is fundamentally seen and how Hadith literature is constructed in the Western discourses, or how Muslims see it. In the Muslim scholars have reconstructed it in that sense. And apart from that, the point is it's not less than a miracle how the way Quran has been, and it is being recited by a population of 2 billion people at such a planetary scale, and the words, One is if we try to understand Quran as how the elements of Judaic and Christian. For example, the addressees of Quran have been, according to Quran, 5 people. They have been uh, the Jews, the Christians, the polytheists of Makkah. They have been munafiqeen or hypocrites, and the fifth, they have been mumins or Muslim, or whom they have been addressed. So under this thing, so whether the Jews and Christians, so what sort of Jews and Christians they lived at that time in Makkah or Medina? What sort of background was there? What sort of literature, Jewish literature or Christian literature was available at that time? How did Quran address it in that sense? So if you can see it, you can see it in the various ways, the verses of Quran in that sense. So that way, Quran is not a linear book in that sense. And how the chronology of Quran, which I was talking of, it's a very discussed topic, the ordering of the Quran, because the way Quran has been arranged, it's not the way order of revelation is not accordingly that the Western these people who have written books on it, the coherence of Quran, and maybe one response of is that there is an internal coherence of Quran, whether it's a Farahi, Islahi thing that there is a internal coherence of Quran, or whether there is this Fazlur Rahman's double the internal and the external elements of Quran, where you can find a coherence of Quran in that sense. It's an answer to those uh, writers or those people who have worked on how Quran got in that sense. What Urdu says mudawin, it got collected in some sense. So we are in the next part of this thing. We are going to see how Quran and Hadith got somehow appreciated in that sense. Quran, Hadith, and how it got appreciated in that sense, in how it got understood over centuries, and how can in our century how we can also appreciate to the impending needs, or how we can appreciate it today in our in the coming lecture. We are going to discuss these things. Hope I have tried to make a sense of desperate things, trying to make a coherence of this lecture within the background of coherence of Quran. This. Thanks.